Greetings and welcome back to our channel. If this is your first time here, please consider hitting the subscribe button and turning on notifications so you won't miss the stories that are shaping the global economic and political landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, if just a decade ago the Caribbean Sea was still seen as a calm haven after the tremors of the Cold War, then in recent weeks, those crystal blue waters have changed color. No longer just a tourist destination, the Caribbean has become a stage for a dramatic showdown. The might of a superpower versus the desperate resistance of a nation pushed to the brink. And what has drawn the world's attention isn't just the threats being exchanged. It's the presence of heavy military hardware, warships, floating air bases, and air defense systems capable of shifting the balance of power in mere hours. Before the sun could rise over the southern Caribbean, the massive silhouette of the USS Gerald R split the horizon. The world's largest, most advanced, and most expensive aircraft carrier, carrying 75 fighter jets and thousands of troops, was heading south just a few hundred nautical miles off the coast of Venezuela. Accompanying it were destroyers, amphibious assault ships, support vessels, and a marine unit ready to deploy within minutes. This was no longer a diplomatic signal. This was a real military presence. On the other side, Caracas responded with a move unseen in the region since the days of Fidel Castro. President Nicolas Maduro signed an order activating a full-scale defense model. Broadcast on national television, images showed him standing among his generals, holding a mobilization order calling on all state agencies, armed forces, and militia groups to join a comprehensive defense system. Venezuela's defense minister, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, personally inspected S-300 and Buck M2 air defense systems, along with militia units armed to the teeth. On one side is a superpower capable of launching precision strikes anywhere in the Western Hemisphere within an hour. On the other is a sanctioned nation that still holds over 5,000 shoulder-fired anti-air missiles and hundreds of thousands of fiercely loyal militiamen. And in between them lies the risk of a single miscalculation, one that could drag the entire region into an uncontrollable spiral. A spiral that, once begun, no one can predict where it will end. To understand why the Caribbean, once so peaceful, has suddenly erupted like this, we can't just focus on the fiery images in front of us. This didn't start yesterday. It began months, even years ago, with long simmering tensions that have only now erupted into open flames. Join us in the next segment, where we'll turn back the clock to uncover the roots of the escalating tensions between the United States and Venezuela, tensions now reaching levels never seen before. To truly see the storm brewing in the Caribbean, we need to turn back time, to the chain of events that have been quietly smoldering for months. What we're witnessing today isn't a sudden eruption, but the consequence of collisions, calculations, ignored warnings, and political maneuvering that both sides have been preparing for long in advance. Since August, the United States has launched a military campaign of a scale not seen in decades around Venezuela. On paper, Washington claimed it was all part of the war on drugs, aimed at cutting off cocaine routes from South America to North America. But out at sea, the picture was far more complex. Waves of airstrikes, mysterious ships sunk, and a steadily rising death toll, mostly fishermen, have prompted not just Venezuela but much of Latin America to ask, is this really about drug enforcement, or is it the prelude to something much bigger? By late October, the U.S. Navy had destroyed more than a dozen vessels in both the Caribbean and the Pacific, thousands of kilometers from Venezuelan shores. This only deepened the suspicions of observers. If these operations were taking place so far from Venezuelan territory, how could Washington justify calling it an effort to disrupt drug routes from Caracas? Meanwhile, at home, President Donald Trump repeatedly referred to Venezuela as the Achilles heel of the Latin American left, hinting at the possibility of regime change, even as he publicly denied any plans for invasion. These mixed signals only reinforced Caracas's belief that Washington was preparing for a major gamble. On Venezuela's side, the domestic situation was no less tangled. The Maduro government was besieged by economic crisis, hyperinflation, prolonged sanctions, and a growing loss of public trust. In that context, the threat from the U.S. became a political shield Maduro could use to consolidate his power. A regime on shaky ground often needs an external enemy to rally its base, And Washington, whether by accident or design, played right into that role. With both sides viewing each other through a lens of suspicion, the Caribbean became the body of water where two volatile forces converged. Washington sought to pressure Venezuela's military into reconsidering its loyalties. Meanwhile, Caracas used that very threat to tighten internal control and prove that the nation was under the looming shadow of invasion. Every sunken ship, every offshore standoff, every press conference laced with mutual accusations, each added weight to an already heavy atmosphere. The international community didn't remain silent. France, Mexico, Brazil, and several other countries called on the United States to present clear evidence supporting its drug trafficking claims. Because if a superpower can freely attack vessels in international waters without disclosing proof, then the global maritime order, built on law and rules, could begin to unravel. And if that can happen in the Caribbean today, it could happen anywhere else in the world tomorrow. As tensions stretched to their breaking point, the appearance of a massive symbol, the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. pushed the pressure to a whole new level. Its presence wasn't just another military deployment. It was a declaration, cold, calculated, and loaded with subtext. Suddenly, all eyes turned toward the southern Caribbean, and that's when the big question emerged. Did the United States really send the most powerful aircraft carrier on the planet just to patrol? Or is there a message, perhaps even a direct threat, aimed squarely at Caracas? To answer that, we need to take a closer look at the true capabilities of the USS Gerald R. and what Washington might be signaling by placing this strategic piece on the Caribbean chessboard. When the USS Gerald R. appeared in the Caribbean, the world held its breath. This ship is not just a floating airport, not merely a symbol of U.S. naval power. It is a declaration that Washington is ready to play again and expects Caracas to fully understand. After all, why would the United States deploy a 100,000-ton warship, the most expensive vessel in human history, to waters just off Venezuela, a country whose military capabilities can't even begin to compare? The answer lies not in firepower, but in the message being sent. The USS Gerald R. stretches 337 meters long and is equipped with the cutting-edge EMALS electromagnetic aircraft launch system. It can carry out over 160 sorties a day. Its advanced radar system allows it to monitor the entire Caribbean airspace. Each of its engines generates enough power to run a mid-sized city. Its very presence serves as a chilling reminder that, if the U.S. chooses, it could dominate the skies and seas within hours. But the most alarming part isn't the raw power, it's the decision to place that power right next to a nation already standing on shaky ground. According to NATO experts like Richard Weitz, this deployment carries at least 3 layers of meaning. First, it serves as a powerful deterrent directed at Venezuela's armed forces, not at Maduro himself, but at the officers who hold real influence. The message is crystal clear. You can remain loyal to Maduro, but don't forget who controls the skies and seas around you. In many cases, regime change doesn't begin with bombs, but with cracks inside the military ranks, and no one understands that better than the United States. The second layer is purely political. Maduro, under sanctions and labeled a dictator by the West, still clings to power thanks to internal divisions and public fatigue with Venezuela's opposition. By sending a supercarrier to Venezuela's doorstep, Trump aimed to apply psychological pressure, forcing Caracas's inner circles to face an existential question: will the military truly stand up to the U.S.? The mere presence of the Ford was enough to make Venezuela's power blocs pause and reassess their positions. And finally, in a deeply divided American political climate, deploying a supercarrier to the nation's backyard plays well with voters. It allows the White House to project strength and reinforces Trump's image as a president who doesn't hesitate to confront hostile regimes. In this light, the Ford isn't just a weapon of war, it's a political instrument. But this very appearance triggered a dangerous chain reaction. Venezuela immediately put its entire air defense system on high alert. Combat crews were mobilized, radars ran around the clock, and S-300, Buck M2, and Pechora units were moved closer to the coast. Over 5,000 shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles were distributed to loyalist militias. Field command centers sprang up, and the colectivos, Venezuela's armed civilian groups began patrolling parts of the cities. A single misread radar signal, a U.S. fighter banking too close, a Venezuelan fishing boat veering off course, or even a stray explosion from a warehouse. Any of these could become the spark that ignites the conflict. And when one side is a superpower with overwhelming military superiority, and the other is a nation that believes it's been backed into a corner, the chances of a miscalculation are higher than ever. It's in this tense atmosphere that Venezuela fell back on the strategy it always turns to when pushed to the brink. Not to confront the U.S. head-on, but to turn the entire nation into a fortress, to turn its people into human shields, and to use psychological warfare to make every U.S. move a calculated risk. This is the moment when Caracas's total national defense strategy and its psychological chess game was set into motion. Faced with a superpower capable of launching precision strikes within hours, Venezuela knew it couldn't go toe-to-toe in sheer force. Caracas has no fleet large enough to contest the seas, no modern air force to hold the skies, and absolutely no capacity to withstand a prolonged air campaign. But Maduro didn't choose to surrender. Instead, he opted for a strategy history has shown can make even the mightiest hesitate, turn the entire country into a fortress, and turn any war, if it comes, into a quagmire no foreign force would dare step into. Immediately after the USS Gerald R appeared in the Caribbean, Maduro signed an order activating the nation's total defense system. Broadcast for hours on national television, images showed him standing among top-ranking officers, reading the mobilization order to thunderous applause from hundreds. In that moment, he wanted the nation to understand that the confrontation wasn't just offshore, it was already in the heart of Venezuela. That message was aimed at the public, but more subtly, it was a signal to the power factions watching for any opening to challenge his rule. Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino Lopez promptly began inspecting air defense bases. From the S-300 systems with a range of 200 kilometers to the older Buck M2s and Pechoras, every radar was lit up and operating around the clock. The ground beneath Venezuela became a dense web of air defenses stretching from Caracas to the coast. Thousands of troops were deployed, and on city streets, colectivos, armed loyalist militias, became a more frequent sight, a not-so-subtle reminder that any foreign intervention would be met not only by soldiers but by the people themselves. Caracas understood this well. They didn't need to shoot down an F-A-18 or sink a U.S. landing ship to deliver a strategic shock. All it would take is a symbolic victory, downing a U.S. helicopter, destroying an assault boat, ambushing a special forces unit. Just one such incident would be enough to spark outrage in the American public, provoke fiery debates in Congress, and force the White House to reassess the entire operation. That's why Venezuela's strategy is not head-on confrontation, but making any U.S. offensive effort politically and militarily costly. What's more, Caracas didn't just fortify its defenses, it opened another front, the psychological front. Government news broadcasts hammered the narrative of an impending invasion, stoking nationalist sentiment. Military parades, drills, and live-fire exercises took place with increasing frequency. Visual declarations meant to reassure the armed forces that Maduro was still in control, still strong enough to command. To factions that had tried, time and again, to overthrow him, this was a clear warning. In the midst of a storm, any betrayal would be seen as treason against the nation. But this strategy also heightens the risk of miscalculation. With air defenses on red alert, militias saturating the streets, and military units operating on a 24/7 edge, a minor misunderstanding could quickly spiral into disaster. A flicker on a radar screen might be mistaken for a cruise missile. A lost civilian vessel could be misidentified as a reconnaissance threat. A random explosion could be misread as the opening strike. And when both sides are stretched as tight as a drawn bowstring, the most dangerous thing isn't a deliberate attack, but that one moment of error, just a few seconds off, enough to tip the entire region into irreversible chaos. From here, the most pressing question begins to emerge. Are these overlapping moves, one side flaunting overwhelming power, the other mounting desperate defense, bringing the Caribbean to the very edge of war? Join us in the next segment, where we'll break down how a single miscalculation could trigger a geopolitical earthquake. In high-stakes confrontations between nations, war doesn't always begin because one side wants it, but because neither side can control that one fleeting moment. In the Caribbean, where a U.S. supercarrier is looming just off the Venezuelan coast, and where Caracas's air defenses are scanning the skies at full capacity, that risk has never been more tangible. Neither the United States nor Venezuela truly wants to plunge the region into full-scale war. But the terrifying reality is this: even without intent, war can still come, faster than anyone can stop it. Washington is applying pressure in hopes that Venezuela's internal dynamics will crack from within. Every American move, airstrikes on ships, troop deployments, and especially the arrival of the USS Gerald R. is designed to send a clear message: Caracas cannot continue on its current path. But the more it is pushed, the more the Maduro regime clings to its security apparatus and military show of force to prove it's still in control. When external pressure meets a government backed into a corner, hardened responses on both sides only make the risk of collision greater. In Venezuela, drills, parades, and total mobilization orders are aimed not just at deterring the U.S., but also at sending a warning to rebellious factions within the military. Maduro wants to demonstrate that he holds absolute authority, but that very display of control has put Venezuela's military system into a state of constant tension. A system that operates on perpetual high alert is far more prone to overreaction. A single radar blip could be misread as an incoming American jet. A fishing boat veering off course might be mistaken for a reconnaissance vessel. One explosion near a military base could trigger the activation of air defenses. These kinds of risks have played out many times in military history. In 1983, the Soviet Union nearly shot down a South Korean passenger plane. During the Cold War, the US once raised its nuclear alert level over a simple tape error in a data system. In the Caribbean today, the margin for error has nearly vanished. One misfired shell from Venezuela could bring immediate retaliation from the US. A squadron of American fighter jets flying just a bit too close to the border could be locked onto by Caracas's missile systems, and one mysterious blast in the dead of night could send both sides into full-blown panic, plunging the region into a storm with no way back. What worries analysts most is the role of outside powers. Russia maintains military advisors in Venezuela. China, Venezuela's largest creditor, has no interest in seeing its ally fall into US hands. If conflict breaks out, they may not enter the battlefield directly, but even offering intelligence, equipment, or strategic advice could be enough to shift the balance. A crisis like Syria's could easily be mirrored in the Western Hemisphere, where great powers don't clash openly, but through influence, tactics, and cold, calculated moves. And that's why the greatest threat right now isn't a well-planned military assault, it's a single unwanted mistake. One tiny error, unintended by either side, could shake the entire security architecture of the region, perhaps even the world. The Caribbean appears calm on the surface, but beneath it lies a current ready to erupt at any moment. And if it does, it won't be contained within one nation's borders. It could unleash a geopolitical shockwave across the entire Western Hemisphere. Ladies and gentlemen, looking back at everything we've explored throughout this analysis, it becomes clear: the Caribbean is no longer the peaceful sea once associated with tourism and white sandy beaches. It has become a crossroads where the undercurrents of global geopolitics converge, where every military maneuver carries the shadow of great power rivalry, and where a single mistake could unleash a new and turbulent chapter for the world. At the center stands the USS Gerald R. a symbol of American power. It doesn't glide across the Caribbean just as a warship, but as a signal that Washington still claims control over its backyard. Yet facing the ford, Venezuela has chosen a different path. Instead of backing down, it has turned the entire nation into a fortress, transforming every street into a front line, and every citizen into a link in a vast national defense network. Behind them, the intertwined interests of Russia and China add even more complexity to these swelling undercurrents. One side holds overwhelming power. The other clings to desperation and the will to survive. When such opposing forces collide, the danger doesn't lie in deliberate aggression. It lies in the moment no one can predict. A flicker on a radar screen, a strange explosion in the night, or a young soldier losing his nerve during a tense shift. In just a matter of weeks, the Caribbean has become a Pandora's box, and if opened, the entire region, perhaps even the world, could be swept into a new geopolitical spiral. But like all global confrontations, the future of the Caribbean is not set in stone. It hinges on restraint, on wisdom, and on whether all parties involved can recognize that a war right now would only bring devastation no one is truly willing to bear. We are all standing at the edge, and just half a step forward could change everything forever. So what do you think about these developments? Is the US truly pursuing regime change in Venezuela? Is Caracas gambling its nation's future to hold on to power? And is the Caribbean slowly becoming the next major flashpoint in global geopolitics? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you won't miss our upcoming analyses. Your support is our greatest motivation to continue bringing you thoughtful and truthful coverage of the world's most pressing stories.